really just.
It was really just a schedule.
Snafu with,
You want the nuts on?
well, they're on, but I don't think they're here yet.
You need them?
I don't know. Can you guys see it? They might not be able to hear. I think it's fine.
I'm a little talker.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Russ keeps asking me to share some password with him.
I call the September 11th meeting of the Oxford Board of Selectmen to order, the time being 7:01. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, I'm advising all those in attendance of this meeting that it is being recorded by members of the public. Agenda item C, special town meeting article submitted by Selectmen regarding earth removal to be referred to Planning Board for public hearing in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 40A. Town Planner Eric Rumsey is present and will present this article to the board.
Mr. Chairman, I've asked Tony to also come forward. There's been a lot of discussion in the past about the responsibilities for earth removal, and I think there's been a good historical overlap between our new, winning form, you're just seasoned, right? Newish, yes, and also the assistant town manager who has also had the experience of working with this section in the consideration maybe on the planning side, but obviously this board has had the oversight of earth removal. We know that those rules and regulations are quite old. And so they needed to be able to hold their public hearing, which is one of the reasons why we're here this evening, because they had already booked that. We probably just missed on the communication on my side. So I'm glad that they're going to be able to present it and have a listen to it, and then we have some thoughts about it. Hopefully.
Thank you for having me speak with you tonight. So the earth removal bylaw, as it currently sits, obviously the authority for permit granting is in the hands of the select board. I was requested by the planning board, by members of the planning board, which came from members of you all, the selectmen, to see if the planning board would be interested in taking over as the permit granting authority for earth removal. So with that came the opportunity for us to look at the bylaw, see what kind of changes were necessary, or if any were necessary at all, other than changing the name of who is the granting authority. So we brought this before the planning board subcommittee, and they reviewed a draft bylaw that Tony started writing, and I put some touches on based upon bylaws that I had written when I was in another town in Massachusetts, which were based upon regulations that I wrote when I was working for a town in Connecticut. So the long story short is this came out of subcommittee, brought it to the planning board very briefly, not for the hearing process, but just to see what their thoughts were. And they said to run with this. We checked with our town attorneys. We did hear back. There were a few changes that were necessary. We made those. And at this point, this is what we're going to present to you all and to public hearing, hopefully, as long as you grant this Monday evening. So we have the highlights of the new bylaw, which, this bylaw really, the purpose of it and changing essentially the entirety of the section, or the chapter rather, is to ensure greater protections of the health, safety, and welfare of the residents and citizens of Oxford, regulating removal and filling of earthen materials, as to not create hazardous conditions, washout, excessive dust or noise, changes to drainage patterns, and impact of natural resources of the town. This new bylaw, seeks to eliminate ambiguity, expand upon existing permitting practices, and ultimately protect the town and the taxpayers. The existing bylaw was written in the late 80s, early 90s. That's when it was implemented. Largely has stayed the same since then, and with changes to stormwater requirements, changes in Mass General laws with regards to licensed site professionals and with filling and things like that. We thought that these bylaws that we're presenting really are a good, well-rounded culmination of all of those factors and a nice update. The biggest change, quite frankly, in the entire document is we're adding filling. So placing of material. There's not many towns in Massachusetts that have a bylaw for filling. I did some quick searching today, and I want to say I found 10 or 12 in my brief search. I did not check all 351 towns, but there are not many that do. I don't know why. Is quite frank. I just am not sure. Last time I worked in, we had an individual who filled probably 80 truckloads of material into his backyard, completely changing drainage patterns and his lawn, affecting his neighbors with runoff and things like that. And there's nothing we could do because we didn't have a filling bylaw. So that upset the neighborhood, that upset residents. So this was something that we were working on when I left to come here to the town of Oxford. So, best part about zoning is plagiarism, so we're gonna kind of roll with what's been written previously.
May I just, with respect to filling, and again, as Eric highlighted so well, it's somewhat unique, and I also think about this in a larger scale projects. Given a large amount of fill, it's important to be some mechanism to regulate the type of fill being brought in to ensure that it's appropriate for the environment. Fill, as we know, is just not fill. And appropriate testing and records in place. Now, sometimes, we were talking about this a little while back, on larger scale projects where there's some level of deviation, board's probably familiar, there'll be a licensed site professional from Mass DEP, there'll be some level of oversight. Certainly there will be a level of oversight with respect to that type of fill. But as Eric highlighted, there are those situations where someone may seek, for whatever reason, to bring in a substantial amount of fill that just goes by the wayside as sort of unknown, undetermined, whatnot. So it's important to have this mechanism, and it's not simply a small quantity, but we're talking about significant larger quantities, which I know Eric will touch upon.
Yes. So I'm just going to kind of highlight each section briefly, if you will allow me the time to do so. So section 1 is the purpose. So why are we writing this bylaw? What's the authority behind it? I think the biggest highlight on this is to leave land that's been in an excavated or earth removal or a filling situation in a safe and convenient condition appropriate for reuse without requiring excessive and unreasonable maintenance or resulting in damage to public and private property. Again, like I said, last time I was in, we had damage to private property due to a filling, and this is something that we just don't want to stand for here. The other big part is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the residents and the natural resources of the town. So section 2 is our definitions, largely the same as what is currently. Those definitions are actually really good. We did add new definitions for filling and restoration. I do find that it is important to have terms that are used frequently in the document to be, included in each bylaw. So we'll go to the next section. Section 3. Section 3 addresses the change in permanent granting authority from the Selectmen to the Planning Board. Simple 1-2 sentence section, just highlighting who is the authority having jurisdiction in this case.
And Eric, you reminded me of, Section 3 is the section that really, in our take and discussion. In the past, historically, earth removal permits coming before this board may just be standalone permits, meaning there may not even be a nexus to another permit before another board, such as the planning board. The earth removal permit, in tradition is that would be tied to a project, some type of development, some type of maybe a subdivision or a commercial development, whatnot. By bringing this into the planning board's jurisdiction, it allows them, again, to look at an earth removal permit, but also in context of, well, tell me where this permit falls in your development plan for, is there a subdivision being proposed? Is there a couple of house lots? Is there a commercial development? So it allows that one board to look at sort of the, all the issues and all of the stages of a project as they consider from start to finish. Earth removal is just one component of what to be just one component. What's interesting in the past, and I'm not highlighting any particular project in Oxford, but in general, where we have these situations, which in other communities have these standalone earth removal permits going before a BOS, where it would stand alone, they get their approval, but there's never actually a project beyond the earth removal operation that this is connected towards. I think that gets missed. So I digress, but Section 3 is really the root, the genesis of why we even started to talk about where the best home is for earth removal. Think again of projects that would require peer review. This allows also a certain predictive peer review, but through planning board process, through a subdivision or a special permit, that board, like this board, yes, has the authority to do peer review. But again, keeping it all under one house, one jurisdiction, is helpful for planning purposes, for enforcement purposes, for monitoring purposes, and so we think it's very, very valuable.
Okay. Thank you, Johnny. Much appreciated. So Section 4 is the application process. Largely is detailing how and what is required for an individual or entity to apply for an earth removal or filling permit. This largely encompasses the current sections 3, 4, and 5 in the existing bylaw, and then we've expanded upon that with new language. Things that we're including are a stormwater study that looks at the 2, 5, 10, 25, 50, and 100-year storm events. So we want to look at the broad range of what's happening for each storm event that we typically will see in a year or in 100 years or whatever it may be, and how this site will affect that, or how that kind of weather will affect the site. It details what size plans need to be submitted, scale of the plans, and things like that. Very standard things for submittals to planning board. So things that developers are very used to submitting to planning boards. And that planning board is very used to reviewing for completeness when they have an application. We do have a lot of things about, including credible evidence about natural resources and endangered species on the property. If there are any, that they're mapped and those areas are not disturbed, or that maybe the project can't happen because of those things, and potentially having to go through a NEPA review or any of those sort of things that would add time and or additional, authorities that need to review each section. So specific requirements in here in this section, We do have a provision for waivers. There might not be it might not be a necessity for every project to have all 16 items that we list in our application process and procedures to be done. So, personally, I don't love waivers. The planning board will tell you that, but I think in this instance, it's a good thing if it's necessary, because not every earth removal project is the same. They're not all the same size, they're not all the same amounts of material coming out or coming in. So it's good for them to be able to say, this project that's very small doesn't require this gigantic process. So section 5 is regulations. Having this language in here allows the planning board to write rules and regulations. The existing rules and regulations were adopted in 1991. So we've got 33 years of catching up to do, but at least I've got a baseline that we can work with the planning board to write this. And you'll see later on we do have a section for moratorium on new permits, so that we have time to update and renew and write and adopt rules and regulations. So the section 5 gives us the authority, moratorium gives us the time. Section 6 outlines major and minor permits. This is something that is entirely new. Major and minor permits, largely based upon size. 1,000 cubic yards of material in residential is a limit for a minor, 2,000 in commercial zones, and then anything above 1,000 or above 2,000 in non-residential, it would be a major project. A public hearing is required for a major permit project, and a public hearing may be required for a minor project. This is in some ways very similar to what the planning board has now for site plan review. So their site plan review, they have major and minor. And a major or site plan review with public hearing is a site plan review application that has a public hearing, and there's some that don't. There's some that just don't require that level of scrutiny. For example, reuse of, there's a storefront in between N&J and Cumberland Farms. Requires a site plan review, may not require a public hearing. So that would be kind of the example that would sort of be analogous to this. In here, the planning board sets which type of permit they're going to hear. If it is a minor project and the planning board deems that a public hearing is necessary, they have 30 days to notify and to do the advertising for the public hearing. If it's a major project, again, it requires a public hearing anyway, and the planning board will determine that upon that time, based upon the submission.
So when the submission occurs, the planning board will put it on the agenda to accept the application and make those determinations at that point.
Correct. Yes. And no bylaw will be complete without exemptions. And I mentioned what the difference between a major and a minor permit was. What I did not mention was the low end of what triggers a minor permit, which is 500 cubic yards. For our exemptions, again, we have projects that are less than 500 cubic yards. This is aggregate over a 10-year period. So you couldn't just apply for, or actually you didn't have to apply. We'll have to actually work that out. I think maybe a building permit might be necessary or something, but you would apply, let's say, for 100 cubic yards year 1, 100 the next year, 100 the next year, 100 the next year for 5 years, and you're done for the next 5. As soon as you kick over that time, if it's within that 10-year period, now you are into a minor permit status. And so this is for minor projects, landscaping, Constructing pools, buildings, garages, most of those things are gonna be well under 500 cubic yards of material. But we also want to give the residents the option, without having a hearing process and going before a board, to be able to do landscaping projects and things like that, or filling. If you've got a hole in your backyard and you want to fill that in, as long as it's not wetlands and as long as it's not going to affect drainage patterns and things like that, why not? As long as, again, and if it's under that 500 cubic yards, this gives the residents that opportunity to really to do that.
They don't have that opportunity now. Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't believe so. No. To be completely honest, the whole bylaws, because it is under your jurisdiction currently, I've kind of shied away from being a subject matter expert on it, but this one I will be. You'll have to be. So sections 8 and 9. 8, again, allows the planning board to waive requirements of the bylaw with the exception of public hearing for major projects. Again, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of waivers, but this does allow for that process. So section 9, is the time period. This outlines how long a permit is valid and as well as the process for renewing a permit. So currently the permit is, a earth removal permit is allowed for 5 years and can be extended by 3-year increments. We're proposing a 2-year bylaw with, as you know, any extensions, there are no limits to the number of extensions every 2 years. We do have a process for that where the applicant has to apply for an extension no later than 90 days prior to the expiration. We also do say that a public hearing would be waived unless there are complaints that are delivered to my office, to the town clerk, within 21 days after the applying for the extension. At that point, if there are complaints that do come in, then we will look to having a public hearing to readdress. The other biggest requirement for the renewal is the submission of an as-built. So we want to see what the developer has done. How much material have they removed? If it's a large-scale project that's greater than 5 acres, they have to do phasing. What phase are they on? What phases have they completed? Things like that. It gives us an idea of what the ground is looking like after these operations are continuing. Personally, I like the 2-year time period because 5 years is a long time. Board changes, staff changes, any of those kind of things that can come up in 5 years' time that, can really hinder the review of a project. So the 2 years I think is a great timeline. Gives us as a town and staff plenty of time to review projects and to do inspections on projects while in the forefront of our mind as we're going along that, okay, this project has to be inspected every 2 years.
So will abutters be notified on a permit extension?
So we don't have that in currently. That's something I think that will probably be discussed during the public hearing.
In the okay. And the planning board?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then potentially at a town meeting, that might be an amendment that gets made.
At town meeting?
It could be. I would like to do that at the public hearing if that's something that people want. So that.
Well, I mean, if there's a mechanism for if people have complaints and they want to make them in that 21-day period, my thought is, how are they going to get notified?
That's fair.
Mhm.
That's fair. Yeah. That's true. I would hope that we would, if a project is a problem, I'm hopeful that we'll hear from it long before.
Prior.
But again,
yeah,
you're right. If we don't hear, potentially we do need to send notice. Yeah. And what that looks like, I don't, we'll get the certified of others list again and send out notice.
Okay. We're gonna vote on this tonight, we're gonna send it to the planning board.
Correct.
What's the process gonna be for if, after their review, hey, we really need this, we really need that, are we gonna coordinate an approach so that we get the authority at town meeting to make those changes?
So as far as my reading of 40A, changes that are made during a public hearing will continue on to town meeting.
Okay,
That's the final document.
okay,
So, now whether we bring that back to this board as a, I wouldn't say courtesy, but just as a review of any potential changes that are made, I'd be happy to do that. I think that would be.
just so we could give our recommendation
Yeah.
at town meeting.
Yes. Correct.
Okay,
And certainly, we're also, within planning board's recommendation, because they have to give their recommendation to a town meeting, so we could incorporate.
all right. Sounds like another meeting I'm going to.
Yeah, 16.
Well, and if there is, I mean, the main warrant article for the bylaw is already been written and it has gone by legal counsel, so that if there are additions to it, we can, certainly, it's not a complete rewrite, get opinions about that as quickly as possible, and maybe even in advance of knowing that the hearing, if there's other things that are being discussed tonight, we can look at seeing about trying to have that ready to go.
Yeah, to you, Mr. Chair, I have one. I think I've already voiced it with Eric being participating in the subcommittee. Had to do with the fill-in being tested for contamination. And I wanted that added into the article so that Dudley's now faced with that problem with fill coming in that's contaminated. So that the onus is on these projects bringing fill in, that the soil is of good quality, it's not going to be a detriment to the community that's being brought in. So that was another add-on.
And I've been doing some research on that in preparation for the public hearing to discuss that. So,
Good, okay.
so I think, sorry. Everybody's favorite topic, surety.
Absolutely.
Section 10 discusses surety, the requirements for surety, bonding requirements for the project, who reviews the bonding prior to the close of public hearing and prior to the issuance of a permit. So all bonds over $5,000 are approved after review by the town planning board and town council. If it's under that, the planning board can, just review that. A bond of under $5,000 can be a very small project, so that we felt comfortable with, keeping that language in there. Section 10C outlines.
I don't want to interrupt, sorry. But I also do want to highlight that in this section 10, and should this be approved, when the board creates its rules and regulations, the critically important update is in whatever, in terms of the review and who sets the bond and so on. We're not going to have a fixed number as has been the case in the past, a fixed number that was created 30 years ago.
Right.
So it's really important to, I do want to highlight that.
On that, yes.
So
Yeah, yes,
yeah.
understood.
Yep. So section, again, 10C addresses how performance bonds are issued and what performance bonds will be issued. So this language went to the town attorneys. They made no changes to that, so I'm assuming that we are good to go with accepting a certified check, certificate of deposit, money market account, or passive savings account. For these kinds of projects, we want to be able to actually get our hands on some money. I know in the past I've dealt with a lot of surety bonds, and quite frankly, they're worth the paper that they're written on most of the time. Because insurance companies don't want to pay out if they don't have to. So, by us being able to have actual hard money in hand, one, it ensures that the developer or the contractor removing material or filling material is serious, and that they're going to complete this work, and if they don't, we have the ability to do so. We do have the ability in here to refund partial bonds. You know, if somebody bonds a 5-phase project in its entirety, when phase 1 is done, we can reduce that bond amount. Alternatively, we have the ability to say, you know, for this time period, you're going to do phase 1, so we will allow you to bond phase 1, and then when you come back to the board to renew or to go through and say, hey, phase 1 is done, here's my as-built, I'm ready to go to phase 2, we can shift that bond over from phase 1 to phase 2, and we can adjust as necessary during that process to say, you know, yes, the bonding amount was enough, or maybe for phase 2 it's not because there's blasting involved, or you know, something along those lines that are it's a more extensive operation than phase 1. So that would allow us to increase the bond if necessary, and or, you know, reduce if it's a smaller end of things. And so the performance bond is only released after permitted activities covered by the bond are completed to the satisfaction of the planning board. So again, we're looking at inspections at the completion of these projects, which is always a good thing, as well as submission of an as-built plan, which should be sealed and, you know, registered land surveyor, make sure that that is filed with the land management office after it's gone through approvals at the planning board. Our next 3 sections are kind of tied into each other. Section 11, penalties. This is consistent largely, actually it's 100% consistent with the general bylaw as well as mass general laws for penalties that can be assessed on commercial or on construction projects and things like that. Where we did differ slightly is that for each 10 cubic yards of earth removed or deposited on a site that constitutes a penalty, so if somebody does work without permits, potentially it could be they started phase 1 and they moved to phase 3 and started removing material out of phase 3. You know, every 10 cubic yards constitute a new offense. So, I've always said with penalties, the town doesn't want to collect penalties. It's not our goal with these projects. It's to ensure compliance and to ensure that we don't have erosion activities and things like that, and that the site is safe, and that we're presenting to the town a safe and project that is in compliance with our bylaws. Section 12 deals with enforcement. Who can enforce these projects? Who can post stop work orders? In this case, it's the town building commissioner or the town engineer can post a stop work order. And as far as actual enforcement, the building commissioner, town engineer, or the planning board's designee may take any or all enforcement actions. So we did want to make sure that we were not relying just on one individual for this. And especially because of the scope and the size of these projects, it might be that we send the town engineer to review these instead of the town building commissioner. I haven't spoken with Patrick about this and I haven't spoken with Kevin about it, but looking at their areas of expertise, potentially the town engineer would be the person who is a better fit to review and enforce a project like this. The other thing is that if the building commissioner leaves, we're not left high and dry without anybody to enforce anything. So, it gives us the option and opportunity to use multiple people.
Yeah, and although this is, this flexibility is, it's a good practice, as Eric was highlighting. Yes, and there are those times where a building commissioner is looking at if you will, an earth removal operation that then has transitioned into pouring a foundation, right, at that particular site. And therefore, it may be a good practice to have the commissioner lay his or her eyes on that, whereas that person will be inspecting the foundation, right? Again, remember, this is, earth removal should be a nexus to a larger project. And it also helps that, certainly, we don't work in silos, in town hall, so that, the level of communication from building commissioner and town engineer, it ought not be a surprise, as there are site visits, whether from the building side or from the engineering side or the planning side. Ideally, we try to catch and resolve issues early before you get to a stage where the building commissioner comes out to the site. But again, we wanted to have, for all those reasons, we want to have that flexibility that Eric highlighted.
Thank you. And then section 13 is a little different. Details additional approvals that are necessary to obtain an earth removal or filling permit. We'd like this tied to a building permit if at all possible, and an order of conditions may be necessary if there's wetlands on or adjacent to the site, within 100 or 200 feet, depending on the type. Again, this standard language, I think, in almost every bylaw that, other permits may be necessary. Move on to sections 14 and 15. So 14 deals with our existing permits. Basically what we're saying is permits that are in effect as of the time of this bylaw may continue in operation without obtaining new permits. Permits that expire will have to comply with these bylaws once they're approved and we have a date and everything else. But we don't want the existing projects to have to stop work.
Right.
That's very important. Same thing with our 6-month moratorium. That does not apply for renewals on existing projects. So if there is a project that is coming up for renewal, let's say in January, February, and within that 6-month time frame, the moratorium does not preclude them from being able to read through these bylaws and submit the required documentation to extend or renew their project. And section 16 is our performance standards. So in section 16, we have 22 performance standards for earth removal or filling operations, with an additional 6 specifically for major earth removal or filling projects. And these detail hours of operation, what's necessary for blasting, things such as slope that will be allowed during an excavation, so that we don't end up having undercuts or one-to-one slopes or things of that nature. Erosion controls that are necessary, stormwater that's necessary, access, our inspection process and how, what sort of notice we have to give for access to properties, where you can excavate, how far from your neighbors can a project begin, minimum separation distances between properties. If parcel A has earth removal and parcel B has an earth removal, that they're not right next to each other unless there's an agreement between the two of them to continue or to combine the projects, their parcels. What to do about stumps and boulders and things like that, where they are disposed of. And Councilman Yule, I know you and I have spoken about ensuring that material that's brought on site is clean and not contaminated. I think in here is a great spot for us to add that. Again, I think we'll have to discuss that during public hearing, and again, we'll bring that before you with what the new language is. But I think that's the best place for that. And I would not put that in just as a major. I would put that into that 22, so it'd be 23, potentially 24. I don't know how many performance standards for all projects. And one of the things that I'd like to go beyond contamination and include invasive species. A few years ago, I was doing inspections on a condo site that the developer had brought in a loom pile that was not screened. And he screened it on site, but his screen was a boulder screen. It was not a soil screen. It was not what was right for loom. And he spread all this out, and every single yard was covered in hogweed. So they had to rip up all of these lawns, properly dispose of all of this material, bring in all new seed. I mean, it cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think, and time. And then the residents in the condo development ended up suing him because that's all, they can't plant anything, they couldn't do anything because their whole lawns were taken over by this hogweed. So we want to prevent that at all possible. I think in here, I would hope that, I know we have the provision for waivers, but I would hope that the planning board would look at this and say, we're not going to allow many waivers within performance standards or any within performance standards. But I also think that we've written them so that they're not arduous and difficult for a developer to adhere to when they're conducting their projects. And last, any questions?
I think it's great. I've been wanting earth removal over in planning for, I don't know, how long, Joni?
Yes. Discussion.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the existing land disturbance bylaw, is that only triggered by new construction? Is that why that doesn't cover fill? Is that what's going on there?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. So as part of this process, so we have in our definitions a quarry. So as part of this new earth removal review, the planning board's going to be reviewing, hey, is this, because this has been kind of a question I've had in the past, is when is it a construction project and when is it a quarry and where do you draw the line? So is that going to be part of this planning board review?
It is, yes.
Okay. So for existing quarry uses, they'd be pre-existing non-conforming, what part of this can we apply to them?
So they would be pre-existing non-conforming until it comes time for renewal. Once it's time for renewal,
Okay.
we're going to look for them to comply with the new bylaws. Again, not wanting to be too arduous for projects that are in existence and potentially have been for many, many years. It might be just as simple as, hey, submit us an as-built plan, detailing what you've done based from your initial, and give us that update. We want to know what these projects are doing, what they're, if it's a 100-acre site and they're, let's say, removing 10 million cubic yards of material, where are they in that process? Have they removed 9 million? Have they removed 1? What's their blasting schedule like? Things like that we're going to want to ask. And what do the neighbors think? Are there issues? And again, not wanting to be arduous and things like that, but there are things that are reasonable for neighbors to have for complaints. Noise, dust, cracked foundations, potentially if there's blasting. Cracked foundations does apply under other laws, but especially if it's coming from blasting. But I think it's good to know for a project, and it's good for the applicant to know that also. They may not know because no one's come to them specifically to say, hey, my well is dry. I had to dig a new 500-foot deep well. My foundation cracked in 4 places. if the resident doesn't go to them directly, they just may not know. Of course, I would hope that if it comes to us, we would tell them, but, you know, we just wanna make sure that we have this process in place to convey that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, do you have like a copy of this that we can see, because it's not in our packet, of the actual language?
The actual language,
Yeah.
I have a copy.
Can you spare it? Or do you need to keep it?
No, I can take that. There are copies both
The clerk.
in the clerk's office.
The clerk has them, so if somebody goes tomorrow, they can see the
Yes.
language? Okay.
And there's a copy in the hallway out here as well.
Oh,
But
perfect.
yes, I'll
Thank
give
you.
you a copy before we leave if you like.
We'll share with all.
Yeah, we can make, I'll make copies before we leave.
Been part of the process, I have copies. So, you, Mr. Chair, the public hearing, the things we raised, concerns or, well, not concerns, but the additional thoughts to add to make this a better article, we can present them at the public hearing, and then if there's a process that we can then amend the article as written currently
Correct.
for consideration at town meeting,
Yes.
to be able to speak to it with the tweaks, so to speak,
Yes, we can.
of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the point of the public hearing is if there are things that, quite frankly, we missed. If there's things that, you know, a resident, let's say, who lives adjacent to an operation thought of that we didn't, because
Right.
I can't be everywhere at all the times, and again, I've been doing this quite a few years, but things change every year and every month even, so, yeah. So we do have that ability within chapter 48 to amend prior to town meeting.
I'll entertain a motion for a special town meeting article submitted by the Selectmen regarding earth removal to be referred to the planning board for public hearing in accordance with Mass General Laws, Chapter 40A.
Make that motion.
Seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Eric, thank you.
Thank you.
Tony, thank you.
You guys did a great job. I thought you were just gonna pick it up and move it over, but no, you moved over by everything.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I like that better. Some of ours is still.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Some copies for me.
Next, on the agenda is approval of the special town meeting warrant. Any discussion? Yes,
Through you, Mr. Chair, Madam Town Manager, will you be able to give like a video presentation like you've done in the past for residents?
Yeah, I was gonna actually speak. That's one of the reasons, even tonight's presentation will be a virtual warrant. We haven't filmed it yet, but we will be doing that so that we can get that out. So everything that you just heard here will be there, only just a slightly different, presentation. And, all the other articles will too. And so if you look at the rest of the warrant, it's pretty straightforward. I think that most of the committee, the board would see what we typically have. The ones for unpaid bills, for capital stabilization, to see if we'll do anything with that. We also have, our treasure collector is trying to get us to adopt the provisions of Mass General Law related to how we take in and invest trust funds on behalf of existing trust funds we have for looking at the prudent investor rule, but I'm gonna let her speak to that, in our virtual warrant and at town meeting. Again, it's another best practice. We've been improving our financial management strategies for a long time. And, as someone who sits there with the investment companies for the various trusts, we want to make sure that we have the same kind of level of expectation for prudent investing. And then, of course, we have the article on sewer enterprise funds. We're waiting to hear from the Department of Revenue. I know not everybody has sewer in town, but it's one of those things that the Department of Revenue looks at, making sure that the amount of money coming in matches for the amount of money that is being requested. And so we're putting this on as an article if we so need it, but we don't know that yet. We should be hearing that by next week, so we'll have a good idea. So we may need to use this if we have to make an adjustment, because that's the only way you can make an adjustment is to actually put an article.
Put it on.
And then it gets all incorporated into all the other formulas that the Department of Revenue and DLS looks at. If we don't need it, it'll be something that we'll pass over, but it will be there just in case.
To you, Mr. Chair, Manager, I thought our free cash was already certified. Is that not-
It's not free cash, it has another mechanism that it has to do with.
Oh, yeah.
I think, yes, so it's a matter of looking prospectively. I'm gonna let our finance director talk about that if she needs to, but from what I understand, we may or may not need that, but it has to do more with some other formulas that they look at. They may make us do it to be more in keeping, so, yeah. So it doesn't affect that piece from what I understand, it's more about the actual figures that we put in to match what we put in as an expectation. So that's the best I can do for you right now. But hopefully we won't need it, but if we do, we'll have a good explanation from our finance director, right? So the Article 5 is one that I think the whole committee of the board is familiar with, and that has to do with purchasing a piece of property that's known as 0 Charlton Street, which is the property that is right next to the senior center. And we're moving in that process to actually be able to acquire it. And so this article, is one that provides for that. And of course, we'll talk about the benefits of that as we go along. And the final article is the zoning article changes for earth removal. So pretty straightforward.
I'll entertain a motion to approve the town meeting warrant as written.
So moved.
Seconded?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Terrific. Thank you.
And the time being 7:52, I'll entertain a motion of the board to adjourn the meeting at 7:52.
So moved.
Seconded?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
And